So we have two questions on the Hawks. The first one comes from the NBA Chicken, who is a loyal question asker. I would love to know at NBA Chicken, why is your Twitter handle the NBA Chicken? I'm just very curious. They ask, what's going on with the Hawks? Is it a bad road trip against stiff competition, or are they not as good as expected? And then Reginald asks, Hawks, why? So he boiled it down to
just a great question.
Yeah, just two fantastic questions, very different approaches. So I actually just wrote a little bit about this, but I am curious and if this makes you feel any better, I did say I thought the Hawks, given the Kyrie Irving BS in Brooklyn, I thought they were going to finish second in the Eastern Conference. So it's not like I wasn't high on them and wrong about them. But what are your impressions of this Atlanta team that has now lost 7 of their last 8?
Yeah, it's obviously not ideal, and I do think that the schedule at least plays some part of that. If you look at who the losses have come to and where they've taken place, at Washington, somewhat excusable, at Philadelphia, excusable, at Brooklyn, excusable, at home against Utah, excusable, on the road against Phoenix, excusable, on the road against the Warriors, excusable, and on the road against the Jazz, excusable. The issue is that that's 7 losses in 8 games, as you said, which means that it goes beyond the schedule, because there is something just a little off with this team. It feels like we're seeing a regression to the typical Nate McMillan offense that he's run in previous locations, where the play calling just lacks a little bit of creativity. It relies a little bit too heavily on long 2-pointers, on a lot of sets that are designed to produce mid-range looks, and that just isn't a fit for the personnel of this Atlanta team, which has a ridiculously good 3-point creator and assist generator in Trae Young, surrounded by a ton of shooting options who excel from beyond the arc and can also serve as secondary playmakers. So it feels a lot like this Hawks offense is kind of stuck in the mud in the half-court setting, trying to kind of half-heartedly go through these motions in a way that isn't designed to optimize their talent. We're not seeing the ball move a lot. If you look at the amount of passes teams make per game, only the Dallas Mavericks have had fewer than the Atlanta Hawks. Granted, that's not a perfect
Shout out
measure.
Jason Kidd.
Shout out Jason Kidd, as always. It's not a perfect measure. The Detroit Pistons are actually leading the league in passes made per game, but when it comes to this offense, what should be more of a free-flowing, freewheeling unit with creativity, with a lot of 3-pointers generated off the catch, that's just not happening. I do think it is at least in some part due to just some subpar shooting performances. No one is shooting particularly well against tight, contested coverage to this point of the season. Clint Capela is clearly still hindered by the Achilles injury that he suffered last season. He hasn't had that same explosiveness around the basket, only shooting 59% at the rim. And without that threat, it makes it easier for defenses to key in on Trae when he's driving into the lane, which makes it harder to find the kick-out opportunities. So it's a convergence of a lot of different factors that all feel fixable. It's probably a little bit too late, given the Heat's hot start, given this terrible run, to expect the Hawks to move into that conversation for a number 1 or number 2 seed in the East. But it still feels like this team is going to figure it out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, those are one thing. I'll correct myself because people will come to Jason Kidd's defense. I know that Dallas with Luka has never been like this team prided on a ton of ball movement. So, but any chance to troll Jason Kidd, I'm totally there for. Someone did stick up for the amount of times that he was having Luka post up though with the Mavericks this season, which was an interesting take to have. I think they blamed it on Luka. Someone in my Twitter mentions. I thought that was an interesting way to go about it, because it would be the coach's job, even if it was Luka's choice to post up against non-mismatches, it would be the coach's job to ensure that stops. So
there are a lot of weird decisions going on in Dallas. Also, can you tell that I lied and I actually did have a little time to prep?
I could tell as soon as at the beginning, I was like, all right, well, obviously he knows it, but then I'm like, okay, no, he knew too much of this. It's interesting because their offense is definitely underachieved. I'm curious is how much has to do with this stretch where you mentioned you play the Jazz twice. The Warriors are the best defensive team in the league. So there are just a bunch of tough matchups there. I'm more keyed in on their defense, which you could probably explain in part because of this tough schedule. Only the Grizzlies, by the way, have played out a harder strength of schedule to date. Atlanta's defense is 30th in points allowed per possession during this. I called it a stretch du poop, and is now 27th in points allowed per possession for the year. Opponents are
And
shooting
just for context, there are only 30 teams in the NBA.
yeah, 30 of 30.
NBA math.
Honestly, let's just call them 31 of 30 at that point over this stretch. They rank
That seems
31st
fair.
out of 30 teams in defense. Opponents are shooting, and this is overall, better than 70% around the rim. I feel like Clint Capela doesn't look the same this year. I do like they're getting by when he and John Collins play together, but the offenses are shooting 81.8% at the rim when Capela is playing without John Collins. That is wild. I think it speaks to who's playing the four a lot during those stretches. And there have been, when you watch this team, it does feel like Nate McMillan called it being drunk on emotions. I don't know if that's necessarily what it is, but there are stretches where it feels like they don't want to go back on defense. They are, if they commit a turnover, it feels like they're not even trying to get back on defense. They're allowing 1.5 points per possession after a turnover. That is bad for anyone who is wondering.
I think a lot of that is stemming from the offensive woes too, just because this is an offense that last season on the run to the Eastern Conference Finals with largely the same personnel, if anything with lesser personnel, it looked easy. You know, everything flowed, everything seemed seamless, it seemed effortless, and it just feels laborious this year. Anytime the Hawks enter the half court, they're working hard to generate even contested looks. And I think that has an impact on the other end of the floor, A, because they're taxed, B, because they're mentally drained, and it's harder to commit on that defensive end if you're not in it.
Well, there's also the fact that if you're missing shots, it's going to be statistically easier for opponents to get out and attack you when your defense isn't set. Their defense has still been bad by those standards to me. I think not two of the things, another smaller thing that stands out is like the all bench unit that they've tried out that needs to go. They can stop playing that always and forever. I wonder if they do need to play DeLon Wright a little bit more to get up their defense. I think more than anything though with this team, I'm wondering if like they need to figure out a way to actually consolidate the rotation, maybe decide more consistently which guys aren't playing, because it almost feels like the disease of depth to some extent. And I think you could argue that might be a larger symptom for them on the offensive end. Is there a trade out there where they can consolidate talent? I think that's too easy to say because it's hard to really take stock of the trade market right now. But I'm wondering if it would just behoove them to move forward with more of a finite or set rotation, or do they have to take the trade market at some point? Because that does feel like it could be an issue for this team. I do think they have the potential to be a lot better. And I don't want to read too much into this 8-game stretch just because it's been a hellscape when you look at their opponents for the most part, and very road heavy, as you already mentioned. I still think, even by those standards, they've underachieved.
The real key here is just going to be giving more run to Jalen Johnson and Sharif Cooper.
Yeah, play Jalen Johnson at the 5, and just get friggin' weird. This team has been disappointing. Do you still how worried are you on a scale of 1 to 10 about them long term this season?
Like a 2.
I might be a little higher than that because I am wondering if like the defense needs to be a lot better. You're right, the offense needs to be a lot better, but they've been like okay on offense while kind of sucking because
with this roster composition, you can't just be okay on offense. I still like, even if they're a fringe top 10 offense, that's a problem.
Well, wouldn't that speak to being more worried about them than anything?
No, because I think that these are fixable issues. Not everyone is going to keep slumping at the same time. You're eventually going to see some progression from Cam Reddish, from DeAndre Hunter, from Kevin Huerter. Just the regression from everyone at the same time, while coupled with a bad schedule, is see 7 losses in 8 games.
I'm going to go with like a 5.5 here, just because I know the stretch has been tough, but it's just something I'm going to watch because there's just a lot of noise. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, I feel like, in the East right now where the Nets offense isn't as good as you expect. Chicago is fantastic. The Wizards are fantastic. The Cavs are really good. Some of these things are going to have to stick over the longer haul is my point. And so if I'm the Hawks, I'm mildly to super modestly concerned about what I've seen.